tell me if this sounds familiar. You bought a new piece of lighting gear, a new piece of lighting equipment that you thought was going to be the game changer. That you thought, once I have this piece of equipment, everything is going to change and my work is going to look that much better and I'm going to appear that much more professional because of this piece of equipment. But once you got it and tried to start using it and tried to start incorporate it into your workflow, the results were not as you expected. So, why is that? In today's episode, let's start to unpack what the real reason is. And spoiler alert, it's not your gear, it's your ability to control your light. Are you tired of the endless stream of fantasy marketing and vanity metrics? Yeah, so am I. My name is James Patrick, and I'm an internationally published photographer, media specialist, and marketing strategist. As a creative entrepreneur, I face the same exact frustrations you have, being bombarded by generic advice that promises success but never lives up to the hype. We need to move beyond the posturing, beyond the facade, beyond the image to navigate the unique challenges we face as creatives. Together, we're going to dive into real stories, real strategies, and the real work that can lead to the real results. This is the Beyond the Image podcast. What is going on? And thank you so much for tuning into this or latest episode of the Beyond the Image podcast. I'm your host, James Patrick, and I truly appreciate that you took the time to get some information, get a little inspiration to help you in your creative entrepreneurial journey. Now, I do want to say that at the end of this episode, I'm going to be dropping a link to a free resource. It's a brand new book I created that will help you better manage and control your lighting game. Now, I want to start by sharing a misconception that I personally had about photography. And the misconception that I falsely believed was that the more lights that I owned or the more lights that I used, the better quality image I could create. The problem I was dealing with was that I was a broke college student. So I actually couldn't afford much. And I would blame my lack of progress or my lack of results on the fact that I couldn't afford the gear that would make me professional. That was the unfortunate part. The fortunate part was that I could only afford one light. And because I could only afford one light, I was forced to really work hard to try to maximize what I could get done with a single light. Now, flash forward 20 years and 800 magazine covers, I could tell you confidently that there are nearly an infinite number of ways that you could create an image using a single light, one light source. And even though at this point I've bought, I don't know, I've afforded myself dozens, if not over 100 lights in my career, I can still and often will return to a multitude of different setups that I could create using a single light. I think about that interaction I had with a photographer who was on set when I was shooting a high key cover look that just so happened to be using 8 lights. And I'm not advocating for this 8 light setup. It's just what I happen to be using to create this. Every single light was doing something very intentional. And the photographer, who had the same misconception that I had at the beginning of my career, made a snarky remark, "Must be hard to take a bad photo with 8 lights." And I retorted to this person, and I meant every word of what I said. I said, "Don't buy 8 lights if you don't know how to use one." And I still stand by that. Every single light I was using had a very specific purpose. And if you moved out one of those lights, you would shift what that image would look like. Now, is that image better than an image with one light? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's what I came to understand. And that was the other part of what I was trying to emphasize. Don't buy 8 lights if you don't know how to use one. So when I think about controlling light, I think about 4 different things. First, I think about mastering the use of a modifier and understanding the various modifiers you could have. And before you go buying modifiers for your light, you need to understand 2 very important things. The first is the difference between hard light and soft light. This is your quality of light. And the way to create quality of light, or the way to move on the spectrum of quality of light, is the bigger your light source is in relation to your subject, the softer the light will be. The bigger the light source is in relation to your subject, the softer the light will be. So if I were to take a light which just has a bare bulb, the intuition is that's going to be harsh. And the misconception about that is it is only harsh if that light bulb is far away from the subject, because the further away that light bulb is from the subject, the smaller that light bulb is in relation to the subject, and thus the harsher it will get. But I demonstrated this in a workshop I was hosting at the Hive Studios just a couple weeks ago, where I took a bare flash bulb and I put it right up against the model's skin. And I turned down the power drastically, almost to nothing. And I took a shot, and it was actually relatively soft light. Why? Because the size of the light source was larger in relation to the subject. Inversely, I could take a softbox, which I mean, the word soft is in the name. And why does a softbox make light soft? Because it increases the size of the light source in relation to your subject. It's no longer the size of a light bulb. It's now the size of, well, it depends what size softbox you buy. Let's say you have a 46-inch by 32-inch softbox. It is now that much bigger in relation to your subject. But if you took that same softbox and you moved it all the way across the room, you now have a harsh light. Why? Because it is smaller in relation to the subject. And in fact, a softbox all the way across the room, powered on full blast, will be harsher, it will be harder light than a bare bulb light bulb placed right next to the model's face. One is larger in relation to the subject. So the phrase "in relation to the subject" is a core component of that. Now, the second element we have to think about when we're thinking about light modifiers is the quantity of light. And often those will get confused, quality of light and quantity of light. So when I'm talking about putting a light really close to a person or moving a light really far away, the instinctive thought is, well, if you move it real close, it's going to get harsher. If you move it real far away, it's going to get softer. More often than not, the reverse is true. But what we're actually talking about is quantity of light. How much light is being emitted? Yes, if I move a light very close to a person, it can be bright, but I can reduce the quantity of light without impacting the quality. And I could move a light very far away and I could turn it all the way up and I can make a harder light. So when we think about shaping light, the first really crucial element we're looking at is quantity versus quality. And from there, you can start to explore different modifiers that can shape and refine your light. For example, I have a bevy of soft boxes in the studio, a variety of sizes and in a variety of shapes. And I will use them for different things based on the size of it or the shape of it. How big do I want it to be? How small do I want it to be? Because each one can do something a little different for the most part. But if you were just starting out, and I've said this in previous episodes, a softbox is a softbox is a softbox. Buy whatever one you can afford and learn to master that piece of equipment. I'm also a big fan of reflectors, which are the silver discs that connect to the lights, and usually it comes with the light that you buy, which is even better. And then grids, honeycomb grids that get placed in the reflectors that is able to hone in and focus and filter down the light in varying degrees, whether it's a 40-degree grid, a 30-degree grid, a 20-degree grid, a 10-degree grid, etc. Another thing that when we talk about elements to consider is your light placement, where the light is in relation to your subject. And for the longest time, I thought that the center point of a light had to face my subject. And wherever I position the light, whether I position it directly in front of them at a 45-degree angle to create Rembrandt light, at a 90-degree angle to create side light, if I was putting it behind them, that the center point of the light always had to point at the subject. It wasn't until a little bit into my career that I realized that you could turn a light almost away from a subject. You can have a point in front of a subject or slightly behind the subject, and you would still be able to light the subject. And this is known as feathering the light. So if I wanted an even softer portrait, I could turn the light, let's say it's a softbox, and turn it so it is facing just in front of the subject. Light is still going to bounce around the inside of that softbox and it's still going to illuminate that subject. And it's actually going to be much softer light than pointing the light directly at the subject. Because if you're pointing a light directly at a subject, you assume that you could have a hot spot at the center of that softbox where that light bulb is positioned within that softbox. So, how we are positioning our lights can have an impact on how the light shapes around our subject. The third thing is really based right off the second thing is understanding shadows and where you want the shadows to be, what you want the shadows to look like, and how rich you want those shadows to be. So you could throw the shadows in a certain direction. You could make the shadows harsher with a harder light. You could make the fall off more gradual with a larger light source. You can have the shadows angling down if you want symmetry. You could have the shadows going to the side if you want more of a Rembrandt or a split lighting look. Where you're throwing shadows says just as much about your vision and your ideas and what you're trying to create as where you're putting highlights. So understand where you're putting the highlight and where you want the shadows, and then what you want those shadows to look like. Are you trying to erase as many shadows as you can? Is that your intention? Do you want more of a flat lighting? And thus you want the light almost centered right on the person, almost at eye level. So you're essentially trying to blow out as many of the shadows as possible. And then the next thing is, are there constraints that you have that you can overcome with a creative use of your equipment? So an example would be in a single light. I'm a big fan of putting my subject close to the background and using a single light to not only illuminate my subject, but to create a sharp shadow of my subject behind them. It gives them a sense of place, it gives dimension to the photo, and I can create an interesting balance with how I'm posing my subject and the shape of the shadow that is then getting cast onto the backdrop behind them, or how much I want to incorporate shadow on their face or on their body. These are constraints that we could work with. Okay. Or I'm using the same light and it's a bigger light and it's a softer light and I'm moving it to the side a little bit and I'm illuminating both my subject and my backdrop at the same time. So I'm essentially getting the use of two lights, but I'm just using one. There are ways that you can maximize your light simply by testing which modifier you're using, the position of the light, and the intensity of the light in relation to your subject. So I'll give a couple examples when I'm thinking about one light photo shoots and how they can give drastically different looks. I was working with the Jewish war veterans of the United States, and I had the chance to work with several dozen war veterans from every conflict dating back to World War II. And what I did was I intentionally limited myself to a single light setup. I chose to use a single light with a single modifier. And in this case, I used an Elechrome Deep Rotolux, which is a deeper softbox. It's not a large softbox, but it's a deep softbox. And I use this because it was softer light, but it still had a pretty drastic fall off because of how narrow the softbox was in relation to the subject. And I liked the shadows I was able to create on different people's faces. And every person who sat down with me, I only had 2 or 3 minutes with each person. I tried to make a different looking photo simply by how I moved the light around the person. So with every single person, I got a drastically different photo just by shifting the light. I didn't change the light and I didn't change the light modifier. nor did I change the intensity of it. I just moved where it was in relation to the subject based off what I wanted to create with that subject. And now I have an entire library of photos that look unified as they were done with the same light and the same modifier, but different enough to be interesting in a collection. Another example I'll give is a situation where we had to get creative because we were constrained with equipment. I was filming a campaign in South Carolina, and we had ordered a set of lights from an online rental company. Unfortunately, one of the lights got lost in shipping, never arrived. And so we had one light when we really wanted two lights for this setup because we wanted one key light and a really strong fill light. We didn't want a lot of shadows in it. So what we did was we ran to Staples. We have one light. We ran to Staples. We bought big pieces of poster board. Then we went to a grocery store and we bought aluminum foil and Scotch tape. And we taped the aluminum foil to these poster boards and created two very punchy silver reflectors. And we put one reflector on the opposite side of the key light. So it was a filling in. And we put the other one right underneath the person. So it was an upward fill. So we created a massive, very bright fill from the opposite side of the key light and from underneath. And it worked perfectly. We just had to get creative. I was on a shoot where my modifiers, actually same rental company, my modifiers didn't show up with speed rings. So I was not able to attach my modifiers to the light. And so wanting soft light, I shot the light, not at the subject. I shot it into the giant white wall that was behind me and created an entire bank of soft light. I turned the light bulb itself, the size of the light bulb, into the size of a big white wall simply by shooting it at the wall. Talk about softening the light. These are real world examples. So my final takeaway for you is this. It is not about the amount of lights that you're using to create something unless you know what every single light is doing. And do not think that the lack of gear is going to limit what you can create or what you can get creative with. You can take a single light and make something not only cover worthy, but award winning. So as I mentioned at the top of this show, I have a free resource for anyone who's interested in maximizing the use of a light. It's called One Light, Many Looks. It is a new guide I created. It's a downloadable book I created that includes real world examples, behind the scene details, as well as rendering showing exactly how I position the light and what modifiers I use to create a variety of different looks. And you can get this absolutely free if you go to jamespatrick.com/one light. That's one spelled out. So jamespatrick.com/ONELIGHT/one light. And you can get the free book, One Light, Many Looks. Thank you so much for tuning in to this or latest episode of the Beyond the Image podcast. I appreciate your 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcast app, for sharing this podcast with a friend. Thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.